Okay, so now we're moving on to Stave 3 of A Christmas Carol and carrying on with our annotations. And this is the second of the 3 Christmas spirits. So this is the ghost of Christmas present. So we can start by just writing that at the top here. So in the same way that the Ghost of Christmas Past shows Scrooge lots of memories from his past, the Ghost of Christmas Present is going to allow Scrooge to go and see Christmas days or Christmases that are kind of currently happening in society. So let's read and see how far we get. Awakening in the middle of a prodigiously tough snore and sitting up in bed to get his thoughts together, Scrooge had no occasion to be told that the bell was again upon the stroke of 1. He felt that he was restored to consciousness in right nick of time for the especial purpose of holding a conference with the second messenger dispatched to him through Jacob Marley's intervention. So the second messenger is obviously the ghost sent to him by Jacob Marley. But finding that he turned uncomfortably cold when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all round the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. So there's a few things that are similar. Scrooge is in bed again. It's in the middle of the night, and he's got these bed curtains. So the bed curtains keep coming back as a motif. Remember, motif means this repeating image. All right. Historically, beds would have had, or if you were wealthy enough, you'd have had a 4-poster bed with curtains around it, and that would have kept you warm at night, kept some of the heating in. Remember, people don't have central heating and things like that now. Okay, so we've got the kind of same setting in terms of night. Scrooge is in bed. And this happens, same as before in terms of the ghost visiting him. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Gentlemen of the free and easy sort, who plume themselves on being acquainted with a move or two, and being usually equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, there lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as hardily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. So this is the main bit here, really. The narrator saying to us, the reader, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances. So Scrooge is ready for it this time. Before he was very he didn't believe that the ghost was really going to come. This time he is ready. All right, so that's the main thing to note here. That's what it's basically telling us, that Scrooge is ready for the ghosts, and he's ready for any experience, whether it be a baby or a rhinoceros. It wouldn't have astonished him. It said nothing between would have astonished him very much. So he's prepared for what's to come this time. Now, being prepared for almost anything, and that's what it then tells us, he was not by any means prepared for nothing, and consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. So because the ghost didn't come directly on 1 o'clock like it did before, and nothing happens, he then starts to get a bit scared and starts shaking. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and centre of a blaze of ruddy light, which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, and he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be, at that very moment, an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. At last, however, he began to think as you or I would have thought at first, for it is not always the person not in the predicament who knows what ought to have been done in it, and would unquestionably have done it too. At last, I say, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room, from whence, on further tracing it, it seemed to shine. This idea taking full possession of his mind, he got up softly and shuffled in his slippers to the door. So really what it's telling us here is that he is in bed. A ghost doesn't come to him, but he's kind of covered in this light again, the core and centre of a blaze of ruddy light, okay, which streamed upon it. So we've got light being mentioned again, all right. And what it's basically saying is Scrooge didn't do anything about it, but the narrator's kind of almost directly addressing us and saying, obviously, you know, it's very easy for us to comment and say, oh, well, I would have got up and seen where the light was coming from. And that's what the narrator's basically saying. It's easy to kind of tell somebody else what to do. And eventually that's what Scrooge does. At last, he began to think that the source and secret of this ghostly light might be in the adjoining room. Okay, so again, we've got the second ghost is also initially described as being light. And we know that this ghost's role is to guide Scrooge back onto the right path. And we know just like a torch, you know, that we use to guide us, that's what light does. So that's a good way for Dickens to represent these ghosts. The moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. Now this is quite different because we see this kind of acceptance from Scrooge, which is different to Stave 2. Remember, he kept making excuses like, I am mortal and liable to fall. He didn't want to go with the ghost, whereas this time he accepts it. And we see this a little bit here where he says, when the ghost doesn't appear, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. You know, so there's almost this suggestion that actually, if I just move it back up, he wants the ghost to come, really. And even if maybe he doesn't want the ghost to come necessarily, he was kind of anticipating it. He had prepared himself for it. Just like it said, he prepared for almost anything, but he hadn't prepared for nothing to happen. So he's starting to accept this journey that he's going on, this change that he's going through. It was his own room. There was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceilings were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming cherries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrification of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many, many a winter season gone. So this is still Scrooge's room, but it's important that it's gone through a transformation. It's hung with living green. It looks like a perfect grove. So, almost like a grove's like a little orchard, I guess. We've got bright gleaming berries. They're glistening, crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy. We've got light. We've got mirrors, and we've got a mighty blaze. And he's saying that as if the hearth has obviously never really been used there. So here we can see that the house is going under a transformation, like Scrooge will. And we've got references to warmth. We've got a sense of abundance, lots of things, holly, mistletoe, and ivy. So this list is giving us this sense of abundance. And we've got nature, which is full of life. We've got living green, and we've got gleaming berries. So we've got colour as well in somewhere that was previously very dark. Remember that description of the house before, saying that it was that personification, saying it was like it had run off when it was a little house playing hide and seek and had got left there. And again, the lights and the mirrors, versus contrasting the darkness previously in Stave 1. So There's all my notes there if you need to just pause it and copy those. So this description here of the house is really, really important in the way that it compares to stave 1. And all of these things, these descriptions are signifying this gradual change in Scrooge. So then it goes on to describe the food, heaped up on the floor too, to form a kind of throne, were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat. So words like heaped again are telling us that this is a sense of abundance. And then we've got this list of food as well. That's really exaggerating the quantity. It's like a throne, so we've got a sense of a kingdom. Again, it's this real sense of celebration, almost like a royal event. And the list carries on page 25. Sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum pudding, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense twelfth cakes, seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their glorious, delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it high up to shed its light on Scrooge, as he came peeping round the door. "Come in," exclaimed the ghost. "Come in and know me better, man." Okay, let's just look at some of these bits. So we know that food is really important, and this kind of excess of food reminds us of Fezziwig's party. And this food is about celebration, we've already said. It's also about sharing. And also it's about sort of togetherness. There's obviously going to be lots of people to eat this food and share in the feast, which is really important. Then we've got the jolly giant. This is the ghost. Again, he's got a torch symbolising his role as a sort of guiding light for Scrooge. And then we've got, and he says, look there, shed its light on Scrooge. So he's literally trying to show him the way. But then Scrooge is peeping round the door. So Scrooge is kind of shrinking, sort of diminished. He seems kind of shy. He doesn't seem to have those tough edges. So we can put there, he's losing his tough edges. This man peeping round the door doesn't seem like the man who was hard and sharp as flint in stave 1. So whenever we're reading, what we want to be doing is constantly connecting back to what we have read before. And that's what a grade 6+ student will do, is make these connections between what they're reading now, what they've read before, and what is still to come in the story when we've read the whole thing. All right. So these little bits where we note things like losing his tough edges, we can even put there as a little reminder as what we might compare it back to: hard and sharp as flint. Okay. Scrooge entered timidly, so that word timidly kind of linking with peeping, and hung his head before the spirit. Now that's interesting, isn't it? This image of someone hanging their head. He hangs his head, and this is almost suggesting that he feels a sense of shame. He feels a sense of embarrassment. And if he feels a sense of shame or embarrassment, that means he's acknowledging the things that he's done wrong. He knows that he's in the wrong. So I've put shame, embarrassment, acknowledging, recognizing what he's done wrong. He was not the dogged Scrooge he had been, and though the spirit's eyes were clear and kind, he did not like to meet them. So again, this is really important. He's changing. He doesn't want to meet his eyes, even though the spirit is clear and kind. "I am the ghost of Christmas present," said the spirit. "Look upon me." Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. So he almost looks like Father Christmas. Remember, Father Christmas was originally dressed in green and white, but because print was only in black and white, we didn't have colour TV and things like that. Obviously, whenever we saw pictures of Father Christmas historically, he would just be represented in black and white. And as we have discussed, it was Coca-Cola that turned him red. So although for us as a modern audience, we think, or modern reader, we're like, green, that doesn't make us think of Father Christmas. But there is a definite sort of Father Christmas feel, Santa Claus feel to the way that the Ghost of Christmas Present is being presented. The garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head wore no other than a holly wreath, set here and there with shining icicles. So this is definitely reminding us of sort of the Jesus Christ image. Holly is wearing a holly wreath on his head, just like Jesus wore a crown of thorns. And we've also got this kind of sense of shining and light with the icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanour, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. So a scabbard is like like a sheath for well, it says there the ancient sheath was eaten up, like a cover for a sword. Okay, so that hangs around your waist and you can pull the sword out from it. So the fact that this is eaten up with rust is reinforcing the idea that it's not being used for a long time. There's no sword in it, which means that this is a peaceful man. And then if we look at this description here, he's joyful, he's got an open hand. That is a symbol of giving, isn't it? A hand open is a symbol of how giving he is, just like Father Christmas. And sparkling eye, that's reminding us of Fred. So we've got this man who is open and loving and happy and giving, and who is full of peace. So we've had sort of references previously to, the importance of childhood and kind of holding on to that youthfulness. And now we've got, this is kind of like a Father Christmas to the poor. He's got all this, his gifts are going to be food that he's surrounded with. So this is the sort of thing that Scrooge could do. He could provide all of this for people. He could be a wealthy benefactor. He could be a philanthropist. Remember that word? Sort of sharing out his wealth with other people at Christmas time. And this character, the Ghost of Christmas Present, is kind of symbolising that to Scrooge. So let's move on. Scrooge's third visitor. So the first one was Jacob Marley, the second was the Ghost of Christmas Past, and now we have the Ghost of Christmas Present. "You have never seen the like of me before," exclaimed the spirit. "Never," Scrooge made answer to it. "Have never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers, born in those later years?" pursued the phantom. "I don't think I have," said Scrooge. "I am afraid I have not. Have you had many brothers, Spirit?" "More than 1800, said the ghost. "A tremendous family to provide for," muttered Scrooge. The Ghost of Christmas Present rose. "Spirit," said Scrooge submissively, "conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion and learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." "Touch my robe." Scrooge did as he was told, and held it fast. Holly, mistletoe, red berries, ivy, turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, meat, pigs, sausages, oysters, pies, puddings, fruit and punch all vanished instantly. So did the room, the fire, the ruddy glow, the hour of night, and they stood in the city streets on Christmas morning, where, for the weather was severe, the people made a rough but brisk and not unpleasant kind of music, in the scraping the snow from the pavement in front of their dwellings, and from the tops of their houses, whence it was mad delight to see the boys to see it come plumping down in the road below, and splitting into artificial little snowstorms. So let's go back over this bit here. Firstly, the spirit says, the Ghost of Christmas Present says, "You have never seen the like of me before." Now, this ghost kind of embodies the Christmas spirit. So it's basically saying that Scrooge has never embraced, he's never seen the Christmas spirit, the spirit of Christmas. And when we talk about Christmas spirit, and people having the Christmas spirit, it's kind of entering into the kind of the meaning of Christmas. So joy, family, community, the celebration of Christmas through food, music, dancing, drink, togetherness, all those kind of things, but also in terms of being about giving and about charity. That's what the Christmas spirit is, the feeling of Christmas. We mean when we talk about the Christmas spirit, the feeling of Christmas. And he says, you've never walked forth with the younger members of my family, meaning my elder brothers born in these later years. And Scrooge says, I don't think I have. And then the Ghost of Christmas Present says that he's got 1,800 brothers. Now, remember that this is 1843. That's the year that this was written. So he's got more than 1,800 brothers. So there's an idea that the Ghost of Christmas spirit appears every year at Christmas time. And that's where we get this idea that the Ghost of Christmas spirit, the Ghost of Christmas Present, he is only alive for one night. So there's a new Ghost of Christmas Present every year. So every year at Christmas time, this opportunity arrives. Okay, so Christmas as a time is being represented as an opportunity to him. So we see Christmas, move my notes, oh no, yeah, you can see them there. Christmas is this time, it's an opportunity, it's special. It's almost like a once a year opportunity to be filled with all of these things, joy and family and community and celebration and being giving and charitable and so on and so on. So this is another opportunity that's being presented. And this is one of the reasons why Dickens chooses to set this story at Christmas time, because of the kind of significance of Christmas. We've already seen that the ghost has not got a sword. This is a chance to bring, peace on earth. We can add that there where it says peaceful up above. So the fact that the ghost has got this scabbard without a sword represents how he is a symbol of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Not Godwill, goodwill to men. And this opportunity for everybody to be kinder to each other, just like Fred talked about in Stave 1. So that tells us a little bit about the ghost and his purpose and what he's here for. Now, it's interesting that Scrooge responds with a tremendous family to provide for, because he's already thinking about the kind of cost, how expensive it would be to have 18 brothers. So he's 1,800 brothers. So he's still thinking about in this mindset of money. So we can put it reveals Scrooge's mindset, that he's still focused on money all the time. But equally, he does give in to him. He submits. He says, conduct me where you will. He says, I learned a lesson which is working now. But he also says, let me profit by it. So he's still thinking in terms of financial gain. He says, let me profit by it if you've got aught to teach me. So he's still thinking about, he's still focused on himself. And that kind of fits because the Ghost of Christmas Past showed him all about himself. So now the Ghost of Christmas Present is going to sort of move on to other people. Let's see if we can note that there. So still focused on himself. We can put like the way the ghost of Christmas past, I'm just going to put CP, shows him memories of himself. Okay, so the ghost of Christmas past showed him memories of himself, and then the ghost of Christmas present is going to get him to think more about the Christmas spirit. So the ghost of Christmas past really reminded him that he once was loving and caring and kind and all of these things. And then we're now going to move on from that. So the first thing that the ghost of Christmas present shows him is Christmas morning. So we see the streets on Christmas morning. Now already the weather is bad, but people are making the most of it. But as they're scraping the snow, it makes a kind of music. So we see this kind of image, this motif of music coming out here. And we've got people making the most of the experience, I guess. They're being optimistic. They're finding joy. Even though what they're actually doing is scraping the snow from the pavements, it makes a kind of music to them. They find the joy in it. And for the boys, for the children, it's mad delight. So we've got this sense of people finding the joy, even in hard work or chores. Just clearing the snow becomes a pleasurable experience because they're finding the fun in life. So let's move on to see then what else the ghost of Christmas present is going to show Scrooge. The house fronts looked black enough and the windows blacker, contrasting with the smooth white sheet of snow upon the roofs and with the dirtiest snow upon the ground, which last deposit had been ploughed up in deep furrows by the heavy wheels of carts and waggons, furrows that crossed and recrossed each other hundreds of times, where the great streets branched off and made intricate channels, hard to trace in thick yellow mud and icy water. The sky was gloomy and the shortest streets were choked up with a dingy mist, half thawed, half frozen, whose heavier particles descended in a shower of sooty atoms, as if all the chimneys in Great Britain had, by one consent, caught fire, and were blazing away to their dear hearts' content. There was nothing very cheerful in the climate or the town, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad that the clearest summer air and brightest summer sun might have endeavoured to diffuse in vain. So we see this again. It says directly, there was nothing very cheerful in the climate, and yet there was an air of cheerfulness abroad. Okay, so we can see people making the most of what they've got. And Dickens does this kind of people making the most, this idea of people making the most of what they've got through the contrast between dark and light, and again between positive and negative language. So this is like our description in Stave 1 that we get of London, where we see again the ragged men and boys round the fire and them sort of warming themselves. So we can put a little note here as well, reminds us of description of London in Stave 1. So it's the same message that keeps coming back. The house fronts are black, the windows are blacker, but the snow is white even though the dirty snow upon the ground that's been ploughed up and messed up by the carts and the wagons. We've got yellow mud and icy water. We've got gloomy sky. The streets are choked up with a dingy mist. So all of this, particularly is reminding us of the pollution in Victorian England. But it could also be sort of symbolic. All these references to black and dirt also could be symbolic of society's other problems. The kind of darkness and evil of people. But I mean, here we've got a direct reference to pollution. We've got particles of sooty atoms coming from all the chimneys in Great Britain. So we've got the kind of real reference to the Industrial Revolution here. So we can note that down as well, this reminder of what was happening to the cities and beyond. And yet still he finds some positivity in the fires blazing to their heart's content. So even that is giving us this idea of warmth. And this is the kind of message of the Christmas spirit, that it's Christmas time, come on, make the most of what you've got, look for the good. And that's what he wants Scrooge to start doing, is it's a reminder to look for the good. So that might be another thing that we can note here. Dickens reminds us to look for and see the good. Now that might be looking for the good in people, that might be looking for the good just around us in our surroundings. And again, this is the message for Scrooge, but this is also the message for the reader, to get us to see the good in everything. For the people who were shoveling away on the housetops were jovial and full of glee. So they're doing hard labour, they're shoveling away. So we've got hard labour, they're working hard, but they're happy about it. So we've got this glee, almost like a pure happiness. Calling out to one another from the parapets, and now and then exchanging a facetious snowball, better-natured missile far many than a wordy jest, laughing heartily if it went right, and not less heartily if it went wrong. The poulterers' shops were still half open, and the fruiterers were radiant in their glory. So again, we're back talking about the shops, and there's so many things that we can pick out here in terms of them laughing, Snowball telling us that they're having fun, just like Fred playing charades at his house. There were great round pot-bellied baskets of chestnuts shaped like the waistcoats of jolly old gentlemen lolling at the doors and tumbling out into the streets in their apoplectic opulence. There were ruddy, brown-faced, broad-girthed Spanish onions shining in the fatness of the growth like Spanish friars, and winking from the shelves in wanton slyness at the girls as they went by and glanced demurely at the hung-up mistletoe. There were pears and apples clustered high in blooming pyramids. There were bunches of grapes made in the shopkeeper's benevolence to dangle from conspicuous hooks, that people's mouths might water gratis as they passed. That means like freely. There were piles of filberts, mossy and brown, they're like a little type of chestnut, recalling in their fragrance ancient walks among the woods, and pleasant shufflings ankle-deep through withered leaves. There were Norfolk biffins, squat and swarthy, setting off the yellow of the oranges and lemons, and in the great compactness of their juicy persons, urgently entreating and beseeching to be carried home in paper bags and eaten after dinner. The very gold and silver fish set forth among these choice fruits in a bowl, though members of a dull and stagnant-blooded race, appeared to know that there was something going on, and to a fish went gasping round and round their little world in slow and passionless excitement. So again, we've got this kind of abundance of food. And the way the food is being described, the food itself is celebrating. I'm not going to go into masses of detail there, but the food literally is being personified itself, and described metaphorically, as if the food is literally entering into the spirit of Christmas too. Now, again, an interesting comparison we can make here is just remember, let's note how it compares to Scrooge with his gruel, his bowl of porridge in Stave 1. His grey bowl of porridge, literally symbolising one, his miserly attitude and his reluctance to spend any money, but also his unwillingness to enter into any kind of celebration. Whereas here, the colours, the food is literally making people's mouths water as they go by. Okay, next paragraph on this page. The grocers nearly closed with perhaps 2 shutters down or 1, but through those gaps such glimpses! It was not alone that the scales descending on the counter made a merry sound, or that the twine and roller parted company so briskly, or that the canisters were rattled up and down like juggling tricks, or even that the blended scents of tea and coffee were so grateful to the nose, or even that the raisins were so plentiful and rare, the almonds so extremely white, the sticks of cinnamon so long. Now look, we keep getting this so, this almost sense of excess. There's so much here, and everything is almost like a superlative, the most it can be, exaggerated. The other spices so delicious, the candied fruit so caked and spotted with molten sugar as to make the coldest lookers on feel faint and subsequently bilious. Nor was it that the figs were moist and pulpy, or that the French plums blushed in modest tartness for their highly decorated boxes, or that everything was good to eat and in its Christmas dress, but the customers were all so hurried and so eager in their hopeful promise of the day. And so again, we see this idea of Christmas is a gift in itself. It's the promise of the day. So Christmas itself is a gift, an opportunity. But they tumbled up against each other at the door, crashing their wicker baskets wildly, and left their purchases upon the counter, and came running back to fetch them, and committed hundreds of the like mistakes in the best humour possible, while the grocer and his people were so frank and fresh that the polished hearts with which they fastened their apron behind might have been their own, worn out outside for general inspection, and for Christmas doors to peck at if they chose. So now we're moving up to the top of page 27, and it says, "But soon the disciples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes and with their gayest faces." That means happiest faces. "And at the same time there emerged from scores of by streets, lanes, and nameless turnings, innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revellers appeared to interest the spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as the bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice, when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humour was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was. God love it, so it was." So there's lots of references here to the significance of Christmas. So if it's a shame to quarrel on Christmas Day, we've got this sense of kind of Christmas being special. Again, this idea of Christmas being an opportunity to make amends. Or in Scrooge's case, an opportunity to change. We also see what the ghost of Christmas present is doing. He's spreading joy, but particularly remember those people who don't have an oven in which to cook their dinner. So some people are going to church, and then it says, and at the same time, from all these little streets, carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revellers appeared to interest the spirit very much. And then he sprinkles incense on their dinners from his torch. Okay, so he's kind of giving like an extra gift to the poor that couldn't, that don't have their own ovens. So that's his kind of gift to the poor. And this incense seems to kind of bring its joy and happiness and peace. That's the gift that he has for these people who are carrying their dinners to the baker's shop. So let's just write ourselves a reminder about that as well. Poor people who don't have ovens. So this tells us something about the ghost of Christmas present. We can just write ourselves a note up here because we've got space. He spreads joy. And he is literally Christmas, the Christmas spirit personified. That special feeling of Christmas in human form. In time the bells ceased and the bakers were shut up, and yet there was a genial shadowing forth of all these dinners and the progress of their cooking, in the thawed blotch of wet above the baker's oven, where the pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. So that's just telling us really that the snow above the baker's ovens and the baker's shops is melting because of the heat from the ovens. Is there a peculiar flavour in what you sprinkle from your torch? Asked Scrooge. There is, my own. So this is kind of like saying it's his own like cocktail, his own like mix of things that he's sprinkling. Would it apply to any kind of dinner on this day? Asked Scrooge. To any kindly given. To a poor one most. Why to a poor one most? Asked Scrooge. Because the poor needs it most. So again we see this kind of kindness and this benevolence. Remember that kind of means giving. So he's looking out for the poor in society. He's looking out for and he's looking after the poor in society. And his view of the poor is much in contrast to Scrooge. You remember, Scrooge sees the poor as a problem to get rid of. The ghost of Christmas present sees it as an opportunity to be kinder, to share, and because they're in need and they need his help. So let's see if we can note that as well somewhere. Ghost sees poor as in need. Scrooge sees them as a problem to remove. And we talked about the idea of, Thomas Malthus and what he believed about the fact there wouldn't be enough food, and the way to deal with the explosion of the population was to basically stop the poor having children. And we see that in when Scrooge says, decrease the surplus population. And the ghost here is showing him a different way. He's almost encouraging him to look through a different pair of eyes, different pair of glasses, and see the world from a different perspective. So they're perspectives of the poor. Perspective means like your viewpoint, your point of view is different. Spirit, said Scrooge after a moment's thought, I wonder you of all beings and the many worlds about us should desire to cramp these people's opportunities of innocent enjoyment. So he's talking about these people being the poor. I, cried the spirit, you would deprive them of their means of dining every 7th day, often the only day in which they can be said to dine at all, said Scrooge, wouldn't you? So again he's referring to the fact that the shops are closed on Christmas Day, on Sundays, sorry, and they can't get their food. And remember, this would have been the case every Sunday. Everything would have been shut. And this was what was called, we've talked about this before, Sabbatarianism. And this was because they thought that people shouldn't be doing that on Sundays. They should just be going to church. They shouldn't have any other distractions. But obviously that was fine if you weren't working Monday to Saturday, and really Sunday was your only opportunity to get a hot meal. So I'll move that up so that you can make those notes. If you need to pause it there, then do. So then the Spirit repeats, "I," cried the Spirit. "You seek to close these places on the 7th day," said Scrooge, "and it comes to the same thing." "I seek!" exclaimed the Spirit. "Forgive me if I am wrong. It has been done in your name, or at least in that of your family." So Scrooge is making this connection here that the Ghost of Christmas Present is kind of a, godlike figure, said Scrooge. Right, let's move right down so you can see the rest of this. And this is the Ghost of Christmas Present here. He says, "There are some upon this earth of yours," returned the Spirit, "who lay claim to know us, and who do their deeds of passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, and selfish in our name, who are as strange to us as all our kith and kin, as if they had never lived. Remember that, and charge their doings on themselves, not us." So what is the Ghost saying there? He's saying there are some people on earth who lay claim to know us. So they pretend to be religious, is what he really means there. Or who say they are religious, say they are Christian, and who do all their deeds, like bad things that they do, passion, pride, ill will, hatred, envy, bigotry, in our names. So they're doing all these bad things, and they kind of pretend that it's a Christian thing to do. So if you note that there, they're doing these things pretending it's a Christian thing to do. And actually, what the Ghost of Christmas Present says, they are as strange to us as all our kith and kin, as if they had never lived. So what he's saying is that we haven't asked them to do it. They're not doing it in our name. This is not what God wants. So if we note there, this is not what God wants. So they're doing something in the name of God, and really, the Ghost of Christmas Present is saying, well, it doesn't sit right with us. It's not what we believe is Christian. And this lays down the foundation of this idea that although Dickens himself was Christian, he was much more into the idea of practicing what you preach rather than just being seen to go to church and dress up on Sunday and sit in church and say all the right things, that you actually had to be Christian in your deeds, in your actions, as well as in your beliefs. Scrooge promised that he would, and they went on invisible as they had been before into the suburbs of the town. It was a remarkable quality of the ghost which Scrooge had observed at the baker's, that notwithstanding his gigantic size, he could accommodate himself to any place with ease, and that he stood beneath a low roof quite as gracefully and like a supernatural creature as it was possible that he could have done in any lofty hall. Now this is really interesting, I think, because it's this idea that if we think of the Ghost of Christmas Present as, a godlike figure, he's huge, but also he can accommodate to any place with ease. So we've got this idea that he is like God in both his kind of stature and his size, but also he is everywhere and with everyone. This Ghost of Christmas Present doesn't discriminate. So we can note this down here, really. He doesn't leave the poor out. He isn't just with the pious ones. That means the ones who come across as really religious, who seem to really believe in God. But he can get anywhere, whether it's in a big room or underneath a low roof. And perhaps it was the pleasure the good spirit had in showing off this power of his, or else it was his own kind, generous, hearty nature, and his sympathy with all poor men, that led straight to Scrooge's clerk's, for there he went, and took Scrooge with him, holding to his robe, and on the threshold of the door the spirit smiled, and stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling. So I think here this is a really nice quotation to note, because it shows us that the ghost is a role model to Scrooge. Okay, this is what we want Scrooge to be like, and this is what he is at the end. He is kind, generous, and hearty in his nature, and he does have sympathy with all poor men by the end. So Dickens has presented the Ghost at Christmas Present to be in this way, in order to sort of provide Scrooge with a role model for how he can embody God's spirit on earth, I guess. Okay, let's turn the page and we'll just finish off the bit at the top of page 28 with the sprinkling of his torch. Okay, so that's how he blesses Bob Cratchit's house. He sprinkles his sort of magical, special, kind, loving, peaceful incense on Bob's house. Think of that! Bob had been but 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the Ghost of Christmas Present blessed this 4-roomed house. And that's just reminding us that the ghost, that God touches everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're poor or not. So he gets his kind of 15 shillings, his 15 coins a week that he puts in his pocket on a Saturday. His 15 copies of his Christian name, because Bob was slang and still is slang for money. And it doesn't matter to the Ghost of Christmas Past. He still thinks he is worthy. So we've got this idea of the Ghost of Christmas Present, values everybody. So he values everyone, thinks everyone is worthy. But especially the poor. And if the Ghost of Christmas Past is kind of, the embodiment of God, the message here is that God values everyone. God thinks everyone is worthy, but especially the poor. And this message from Dickens, again, is in direct contrast to the beliefs of Thomas Malthus. So Dickens's message opposes Malthus's beliefs. So again, this is a message for the people of Victorian England that, look, come on, we can't just start cutting out, a whole section of the population just because they're poor and we don't want them anymore and lock them up in workhouses or chuck them in debtor's prison. God wants us to value and think of everybody as worthy. Okay, let's stop there because that's quite a long video for you to watch.